Dear colleagues, the Senate Special Committee on Philippine Maritime and Admiralty Zones is honored to sponsor Senate Bill 2492, or the Philippine Maritime Zones Act of 2023, under Committee Report number 172, which is a substitute bill in substitution of Senate Bill 852, 1089, 1352, 1649, 2294, 2394, 2411, and 2347, filed by Senators Revilla, Ejercito, Estrada, Hontiveros, Legarda, this representation, Gatchalian, De La Rosa, and Tulfo. Mr. President, I stand before you to emphasize the crucial significance of maritime zones law in the Philippines. As an archipelagic nation with a vast expanse of waters, understanding and upholding maritime zones law is not merely a legal obligation, but a paramount necessity for our nation's security, economic prosperity, and environmental well-being. Maritime zones law delineates the boundaries that define our sovereign rights and jurisdiction over the surrounding seas. The Philippines' exclusive economic zone and territorial waters are not just lines on a map. They are the lifeblood of our maritime activities. They provide us with exclusive rights to exploit and manage marine resources, including fisheries, minerals, and energy, Mr. President. Mr. President, after 3 Congresses, the Senate is finally able to move this foundational bill to the plenary session. Allow me to begin with the premise that binds us Filipinos. The Philippines is an archipelagic and maritime nation. With a total of 7,641 islands, we are the second largest archipelago in the world. With more than 62% of the country's municipalities and cities, more than 62% of the country's municipalities and cities thrive on our coast, many of us rely on the bounty of our seas for food. In 2020, there was a Food and Nutrition Research Institute, FNRI, report stating that the fish consumption is 14 kilograms per individual per year and comprises about 40% of the total animal source protein consumed by Filipinos. We have a long tradition of living and working at sea. Not only do our waters contribute significantly to our food and economic security, our seas, our oceans are an integral component to our identity as Filipinos. With all the wealth from our waters, both in terms of culture and natural resources, we are obliged to have the collective responsibility to uphold I'm sorry, Mr. President, I have a call from the Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces. We have a long tradition in living and working at sea. Not only do our waters contribute significantly to our food and economic security, our seas, our oceans, as I've said, are an integral component to our identity as Filipinos. Mr. President, the fundamental interests of the Philippines are inextricably linked to its waters. This necessitates and underscores the importance of having effective maritime governance. At its core lies the clear identification of maritime areas over which the Philippines exercises sovereignty, control, or sovereign rights and jurisdiction, and of the specific legal powers that the Philippines would exercise in those areas. Our Constitution has bestowed upon this august body the task to safeguard national interests by ensuring that the necessary laws and policies are in place for the state and I quote, to protect the nation's marine wealth in its archipelagic waters, territorial sea, and exclusive economic zone, and reserve its use and enjoyment exclusively to Filipino citizens, unquote. The committee, your committee, therefore, cannot overemphasize enough that the adoption of this measure is not only critical and imperative, but is very timely and necessary. Narinig ko po kanina, Mr. President, yung inyong nabanggit tungkol po sa pagtanggap ng People's Republic of China sa ilang lines doon po sa Asia Pacific Parliamentary Forum. Mr. President, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, or UNCLOS, governs the allocation of maritime areas and the states' rights, entitlements, and responsibilities over this. It has been more than 41 years, Mr. President, since UNCLOS was adopted, and as a party to the convention, the Philippines is duty-bound and legally bound to exercise its entitlements, perform its treaty obligations, and ensure that our domestic laws are in harmony with the provisions of UNCLOS. Mr. President, in 1998, the Philippines also declared, and I quote, that it intends to harmonize its domestic legislation with the provisions of the convention, unquote. And I'm referring to UNCLOS. In 2009, Mr. President, the Philippines made the first significant step through the enactment of Republic Act 9522, which made the baselines of the Philippines fully compliant with UNCLOS. The Supreme Court of the Philippines declared in the case of Magallona versus Executive Secretary that, and I quote, the enactment of UNCLOS compliant baselines law for the Philippine archipelago and adjacent areas as embodied under Republic Act 9522 allows an internationally recognized delimitation of the breadth of the Philippines' maritime zones and continental shelf, unquote. After the passage of the baselines law, Mr. President, the next logical step for the Philippines to take is to enact a law that will establish with certainty our territorial sea, contiguous zone, exclusive economic zone, and our continental shelf, and allow us to further understand and exercise our rights and obligations in each zone as underscored by UNCLOS and other relevant laws. The Philippine Maritime Zones Act will enable the Philippines to fully enforce applicable maritime laws and enjoy its rights over its territory and exclusive economic zone. I'm sorry about that, Mr. President. That's, again, a distraction coming from some of our friends helping protect the West Philippine Sea. The Philippine Maritime Zones Act will enable the Philippines, as I've said, to fully enforce maritime laws and enjoy its rights over its territory and exclusive economic zone, and pave the way for clarifying and updating maritime laws and policies which have been enacted prior to UNCLOS. This will further fortify our rights and entitlements over our maritime zones and provide the country with a strong diplomatic negotiating tool in pursuing our interests therein. In addition to this, the clear delineation of the maritime boundary of the Philippines will help relevant government institutions in harnessing ocean resources and maritime spaces that are crucial in developing the country's blue economy potential. According to a study by Dr. Rodora Azanza, the blue economy potential of the Philippines using 2007 prices is pegged at $966 billion to $1.5 trillion if the continental shelf is included. In sum, Mr. President, the Maritime Zones Law will help the Philippines in numerous ways and can even serve as our foundational policy that, 1, serves as the driving force for the Philippines to forge a comprehensive maritime security framework. Number 2, advance the Philippine interest, most especially in terms of protecting, sustainably harnessing, and maximizing the Philippines' marine resources. Third, it will provide guidance on the rights, duties, and entitlements of the Philippines on different maritime zones. And finally, it can be utilized to further the goals of other relevant maritime laws of the Philippines. My dear colleagues, one of our predecessors had the distinct honor of serving as the country's lead negotiator when the law of the sea was being debated at the United Nations. Senator Arturo Tolentino left all of us a message when he spoke at the 189th plenary meeting of the Third United Nations Conference on the Law of the Sea in 1982. Senator Tolentino told us that UNCLOS, and I quote, is a historic milestone in the progressive development of international law, a monumental achievement of cooperation and goodwill among nations. Its provisions, many of them introducing new concepts, will govern the seas and the resources of the world for generations to come, even long after the individuals who participated in the conference are long gone and forgotten, unquote. It is now our turn, my dear colleagues, to continue the work of Senator Arturo Tolentino by adopting one of the most important laws in our country's history. The Philippine Maritime Zones Act of 2023 will be inscribed as a pivotal moment in our maritime history. It is now time for Congress, particularly the Senate of the Philippines, to stand up for what is ours and take this fundamental step in ensuring that our national interests in Philippine waters are protected by passing this law that will govern the seas and resources of the Philippines for generations to come. May I also remind our dear colleagues, Mr. President, of the many incidents of aggression from our Chinese counterparts that we have experienced recently in the West Philippine Sea. One too many incidents of aggression already, Mr. President. It is time we take a stand against this bullying, Mr. President. With the passage of this Maritime Zones Act, Mr. President, we are taking a firm stand. Maraming salamat po.
Maraming salamat, distinguished colleague. Majority Leader.
Yes.